This is the Life at Work Conference podcast, an initiative of City Bible Forum.
Hi, I'm Andrew Laird, host of the Life at Work Conference podcast, where we meet real workers wrestling with real workplace issues. Today, Proving Ground, how God uses our daily work to make us more like Jesus.
And because we spend most of our lives working, whatever that work is, study or working in the home or out in business or whatever, it follows that our faith is tested at work, our values are tested, what we say we believe is about God is tested.
My guest today is Graham Hooper, Company Director and former Senior Executive of a global infrastructure company. I'm Andrew Laird, and this is the Life at Work Conference podcast. When we first begin our careers, often we might have great hopes and dreams of what we'll achieve or accomplish. And if we're a Christian, those hopes and dreams are often shaped by our love of God and desire to glorify Him. And that's, of course, not a bad thing. But is there another way we should be thinking about our work life, that our career might not be so much about what we can do for God, but rather what He's going to do in shaping us? My guest today believes that is the case. Looking back on his career, he's been struck by just how much God used the workplace as a proving ground, a place where He would shape and change him. And he's just written a brand new book unpacking exactly this. So welcome to the podcast, Graham.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Great to join you today.
Look, Graham, we'll come to this idea of our daily work as a proving ground in just a moment. But look, first, take us back to the beginning of your career. It began in Tanzania. How did you end up there, and what was your first job?
Well, I graduated as a civil engineer, and after I finished, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but one thing I did know, I did not want to go and work in an office. I wanted an adventure. And through a UK agency, I landed a job in the Selous Game Reserve in southern Tanzania. And my job was to build and maintain the roads, the airstrips, to build houses for the game scouts, to open it up for the safaris, the visiting safaris who wanted to see the game, and so on.
So any interactions with wild animals as part of that?
A lot. It was a daily occurrence. Yeah, I could tell you a lot of stories about lions and elephants and hyenas, but probably on another occasion. But I lived in a tent for over a year. So I did have a bunch of hyenas around the tent one night, and one of them actually tried to eat my saucepans. I don't know if you've seen a hyena's jaw marks in an aluminium saucepan. It's quite interesting. But
no, I think I prefer not to be honest.
But I learned a lot about crisis management because, like, every day was a crisis. We were in a very remote location, and vehicles broke down, people got sick, roads got flooded. It was a lot of fun.
And tell me, Graham, it sounds like a lot of fun. You got that adventure that you were after. But were you a Christian at this point in time? And if not, how and when did you come to faith?
No, when I left uni and started, I was very much not a Christian. I was quite anti as a student. What happened was, as I was packing my gear to go out to Africa, I was in my parents' loft, and I found some family photos. I thought, yes, I'll take those with me. And I just cast around for a hardback book to keep them flat in my backpack. And I landed on a New Testament I'd been given at school when I was about 14. It was unopened and unread, of course, but it served the purpose, so I stuffed the photos in. And when I was out in Africa, I started to read. I had a lot of time in the long evenings in the bush. And I remember starting at the end, perversely, in the book of Revelation, and I read those words which says, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, the beginning and the end, the Almighty." And that just wowed me. I thought, this is the whole framework for life. God is the whole framework of life, the beginning and the end. I started to read the Gospels then about Jesus. I remembered some stories I'd been taught as a child, but now I was reading them as an adult, and it was like the words leapt out the page at me. Jesus as the person leapt out the page at me. And just around that time, I had a letter. The mail used to come in by aircraft once every 2 weeks. There were no email, of course, in those days. And it was from a student friend who was certainly from an atheist background. and he'd become a Christian. And he said, if I never ask you anything again, Graham, I ask you to pick up a Bible and read, because I've come to believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And with that belief, everything makes sense. And so that was just God's amazing timing, because that's exactly what I just started to do, picking up a Bible to read. So I asked Jesus to make himself real to me. And there was no big flashing light, but a deepening conviction, which has remained to this day.
Wow, it's a tremendous testimony, and a testament to giving people Bibles. They might not originally use them as the purpose intended, but you never know, and opening it and the power of God's Word. You mentioned there that the atheist friend talked about the transformative effect that coming to faith had on his life. I wonder if you have any recollections from that time of what impact, if any, your new faith had upon your work.
Well, I think initially none at all, as I can't remember. I just felt a deep peace that I'd found the truth. So something must have changed in me, because I do recall at one break, I went back to the UK and bumped into an old student friend. And as I walked up to him to greet him, he said to me, "You found it, haven't you?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You found peace." So something had changed in me, but certainly nothing that really affected my work. But I think it was later, after Mauritius, I got a job in Mauritius, in the island of Mauritius, designing and building a new port there. And in wonderful days, I inherited a job on the national radio broadcaster, a program called The Epilogue, which is actually still running to this day. And it was involving reading a Bible passage, and we lengthened it to add some Christian music. And so there was only one radio channel in Mauritius at the time. So people would sometimes listen to this, and my workmates would say, "Hey, Graham, I heard you on the radio last night. What's all this about?" And I suddenly realized that there were the people who I worked with 8 till 5 or whatever, having an insight into a spiritual side of my life, which I kind of thought was mine, private. And so I had to start thinking, what does that look like to them, to see me claiming to be now a Christian? What difference does that make? So I guess that was where it started to make an impact. There were no Christian books, very few Christian books in the island of Mauritius. There was no bookshop at that time. And there was certainly no books I ever found about faith and work. So it was trial and error, and looking back, mostly error.
Well, we're going to come to that, talking about the mostly error. In many ways, that's the theme of our episode today. But look, fast forward from a few years there, just first of all, Graham, and you found yourself in senior executive roles with a global infrastructure company in particular, and that took you right around the world, working in some 20 different countries. Do you want to just paint the picture for us of what family and work life looked like for you at that time? And in particular, what were the challenges that you found living as a Christian in that season of your career?
Yeah, well, I met a lovely lady in Tanzania, an English teacher, and I married her, and she's still my wife, thank God. We had 3 children, and I think looking back, some of the biggest challenges I encountered were ones involved in moving our family at different stages of life around the world. And they were very testing, I think, on our faith. We had 6 wonderful years in Mauritius. 2 of our children born there. And after that, I felt a great desire to study the Bible more. And I actually went to Trinity Theological College in Bristol, UK for 2 years, which was a great privilege. But that was really hard, particularly for Sue, because she was taken from a life in Mauritius where she had friends and she had a wonderful ministry there, to just being a mother with 2 little children in a 2nd-story flat while I studied. So that was very hard for her. So that was testing in that way. After Trinity, I felt strongly that I should go back into my engineering career, and so that was a case of getting a job. Our funds had gone down quite significantly, so it was a reason we wanted to go overseas again. So I was offered a job in Malawi and one in Libya, And I didn't feel right about those. And I have to say to you, it's very challenging when you have a wife and 2 kids turning down jobs when you don't have another secure one. So that was a real tester for quite a while. And eventually I was standing on Reading railway station platform reading the Times newspaper, and I saw this job advertised for a port engineer in Papua New Guinea, and I read the description. I thought, that's me. That's absolutely me. That's what. And so I applied for that and got the job, and we went out to Papua New Guinea. So that was a real challenge with young kids.
So you've gone to Papua New Guinea, but from there was still a desire to maybe move to Australia. Is that right, Graham?
Yeah, so we were actually offered a job in Australia, and we had to wait in UK for 3 or 4 months while all the the approvals came through and the visas and so on. And after that 4 months of waiting, I got a long communication in the form of a telex from the Australian company saying that the job had fallen through. And we were absolutely at rock bottom. We had very limited funds. We were living with my wife's parents. So we had no home, no job, seemingly no future. And I went to church on Sunday, and the preacher spoke from the book of, I think it's Exodus, isn't it? The story when the children of Israel were tested, and there were 12 miles to Elim. They were only 12 miles away from the oasis. And the message was very simple. Hold on, you can trust God. And that was a real word of God to me. A few days later, actually it might have even been the next day, we got another communication saying, sorry, we didn't mean we weren't offering you a job. We meant that particular position was no longer available, but still come out and we'll talk about it in Sydney. So within about 10 days, we were on the plane to Sydney.
Wow.
And then we got offered then a job in Tasmania, and we were in Tasmania for a few years.
You mentioned there the word, Graham, testing, which in some ways is really the issue I want to come to talk with you about now, because these days you're a company director, you sit on a number of boards, but you're also doing a lot of writing, often about Christian faith and our daily work. And your latest book is about this whole idea of testing when it comes to our daily work. It's called Proving Ground. So what's the book all about, and what's the meaning behind that title?
Well, I called it Proving Ground because I've come to the conviction through reading the Bible and my own experience that, and seeing other people's lives, there is no such thing as untested Christian faith. We're all tested in life generally, particularly in times of sickness, bereavement, setbacks, disappointments, and difficulties in life. And because we spend most of our lives working, whatever that work is, study or working in the home or out in business or whatever, it follows that our faith is tested at work. Our values are tested. What we say we believe is about God is tested. Can we trust him with our money, with our future, with our children, with our whole career? Our values are tested. Our honesty is tested. Our relationships are tested. And of course, there's no shortage of temptation. The 3 classic areas of money, sex and power, which stay with us, I think, right through life in different forms. So this whole question of God's testing. Now, testing for us is a very negative thing, usually. None of us like medical tests or driving tests or exams in any form. But God's testing is actually a positive in the Bible. It's to produce gold out of the unpromising material of our lives. And this proving also works in 2 ways. God may prove us, but we also prove God. What do you mean by we prove God? I mean, like the Psalm says, taste and see the Lord is good. We prove that he's true. We can trust him with our lives, with our work, with our career. And so that's why I called it Proving Ground. And I wanted to write it very much because many books about faith and work, I think, are very positive and affirmative, which is great, about the great things we can do for God in our work and so on. But also I wanted to write about the work God does in our lives, in us and through us. And the subtitle is Reflections on Growing Faith at Work, and that's what you find in it. It's personal reflections, Bible reflections, and I hope it's a realistic and encouraging book.
Mm, mm. We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, I want to turn to this topic in a bit more detail with Graham, how God often uses our daily work as a proving ground. I'm going to ask Graham to actually just share a bit more personally about some of the ways that God did that to him. But we'll consider that in just a moment.
Loving this podcast? Then don't miss the next Life at Work conference, Saturday, February 18th, 2023. Wherever you are around Australia or the world, join us as we consider the future of work, how to love your colleagues and share Jesus in an ever-changing landscape. You can watch alone, host a watch party, or join others at a local hub. Tickets are on sale now at citybibleforum.org/lifeatworkconference.
Welcome back. My guest today is Company Director and former Senior Executive Graham Hooper. Graham, let's turn now to the ways God used your career as a proving ground. What's one of the first occasions perhaps where you recall noticing God changing you through the challenges or the frustrations or the temptations of work?
I think mainly in the area of relationships with people. Let me give you a couple of examples. I remember going to church on Sunday and listening to the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek." And then I'd go to work on Monday and I'd be thrown into negotiations and often confrontations with contractors, with difficult clients, with frustrating bosses, sometimes with labour unions. And there wasn't a lot of meekness out there. And I thought, well, what does that mean? What do I do with Jesus's statement about meekness? Do I just shove that to one side and say, well, obviously he wasn't talking about work? Or do I dilute it? Do I just ignore it? What do I do? And I was tremendously helped reading some words from the late John Stott. He said that meekness is the gentleness of the truly strong. And I've always valued that, because meekness doesn't mean weakness. It doesn't mean being a doormat for people to tread all over and roll over. It doesn't mean, caving in and rolling over in those kind of negotiations. But it means treating people with respect in that strength. So I love that. So that was a real learning period, I think, a lifelong lesson, discovering how to actually apply seemingly impossible biblical commands in the rough and tumble of work. I think another another experience comes to mind is I remember a coffee room discussion, overhearing a coffee room discussion where someone commented about a leading executive from another company they had to work with. Said, "I can't believe that guy calls himself a Christian. You wouldn't believe it, the way he treats people." And I winced when I heard that. I thought, I wonder if they're saying that about me. And it was a real challenge, because sometimes, we can all be difficult people, obnoxious people sometimes. We can all, not live as Jesus commanded us to live. And thank God we forgives and renews us. But that's a real challenge, I think. If you say you're a Christian in the workplace, then you need to be careful how you live.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Our colleagues are often watching us far more closely than we imagine. And speaking of colleagues and relationships, as you were there, you've shared with me previously a significant moment for you in a meeting one day where God really challenged you on the kind of leader that you were. Can you share a bit about that with us?
Yeah, I think I was kind of mid-career, and I was sitting at the back of a large meeting. There were probably about 70 or 80 of us in the room. It was one of the annual strategic planning sort of events that corporates have, usually once a year or so. And I looked at the people in front of me and I suddenly thought, I don't really know these people. I'd been so focused on winning work, delivering projects, which was my job, which is what I was paid to do. And I thought, I'm not really relating to these people. It was very much a light bulb moment, as we'd say. And I thought, God, Graham, you need to start building relationships with people. That is at least as important as the work you're doing.
So can I ask then practically, what did that look like? What changes do you recall making in order to do that?
Well, spending time with people, getting interested in their lives. Obviously, one colleague, particularly at times of crisis, I think, in people's lives. One colleague lost his daughter in a car crash. A week later, his wife broke down, and in that breakdown left him. And he was, that was a shattering experience. I was able to share with him and, thank God, point him to a counsellor who could really help him long term get through that. Obviously, relationships. I've treasured relationships with certain people throughout life. People you can go and have a coffee with, you can pray with, you can talk about the football or whatever, and then you can talk about deep things, just moving almost seamlessly from one to another. I think that's a very special gift that God sometimes gives us, friends like that.
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit more about that. I mean, how important has it been for you to have close Christian friends in particular to walk with you through your career? And is there a sense in which God will often use them as one of the means of refining us through our daily work?
Yeah, I think my mind goes particularly, we spent 5 years in Dubai, where I had a global role for the company, and I was there before I retired, inverted commas, from that job. And we used to meet on a Saturday morning. I say we, it was a group of men, nearly all involved in secular work. And many people in that environment, they were all obviously expats, people from India, people from South Africa, people from all over the world, different cultures. Most people had problems, either with their employers, with their contracts, with their visas, with their jobs. It's quite an uncertain environment in working in the Middle East in many ways. And we used to meet to really honestly share, and I think we were able to share at a depth of rarely encountered since with Christians in a small group. It was very special. People could really say what was on their mind. And I think I've shared with you before that one morning I remember particularly an expatriate African guy who had a fast food business which was running into real problems that he couldn't cope with. He got up and left the room, and we wondered what had happened. And he came back in, and he'd been in tears, and he had to go and compose himself. And he came back in and said, this group is a place of integrity. And I think that's one of the loveliest things I've ever heard said about any group anywhere. That people felt able to really share what was in their heart and then to pray about them. So I've really valued that. Sometimes I've had fairly isolated times. There hasn't always been that level of and that's sometimes a lonely road. I think many people in the workplace are in a lonely place, and we need that fellowship. We need an individual or one-to-one or in a group.
Even just that, having them as sounding boards for issues that you might be wrestling with. And if I can just raise one more, Graham, as you've mentioned there, you've had lots of experience working cross-culturally, and so there are different challenges and temptations that can arise when you work in a different culture. And I know you've shared with me previously challenges around the way business is done, bribery, for example. And that being a feature of business in other parts of the world that perhaps previously hadn't encountered before. How did God test you in those situations and refine you as well?
Well, quite in one situation, I won't name the company or the country for obvious reasons, but my name was forged on a board paper to change a contract award. The chairman and the managing director subsequently went to prison for corruption. That was a testing time. I spent the global company I worked for in later life worked in Africa, and there's a lot of difficult situations you have to work through contractually in those situations in terms of the ethics. I'm delighted to say that integrity was a core value of the company. I actually chaired an ethics and compliance committee. So you have clients that you won't work for, you situations you won't go into, and those are big calls.
And obviously, in all of these places, there are opportunities where we can either choose to live God's way or otherwise, and hence that workplace being that proving ground that you've been describing there. Graham, you did mention, though, that we need to think not only about the big ambitions we might have for God, we need to also recognise the way God will often be working through us and refining us in our work. But presumably you don't think we should then throw that ambition away altogether. I mean, you yourself have risen to significant positions of leadership in your career. So my final question is this. How did you go about balancing those two things? Having big ambitions for God, but also knowing the bigger thing might be what he is doing in changing you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a big question that is a lifelong learning process. I think reflecting on that, there are a number of biblical principles I think I've learned and tried to become part of me as I've gone through life. One is that calling. Do I see my work as a career, which is all about me, my goals, my objectives, my ambitions, or about God and his claim on my life? And the Bible picture is of calling. So if God has called you into leadership positions, go for it. And, God has given you, resources and gifts. We're to use those to the full. And I think that leads into the second big principle, which is stewardship. Whatever position God gives you, we're only in it for a while. And I think this theme of stewardship runs right through the Bible, right from the creation, when God made us stewards of the creation to care for the earth. It runs through Jesus's teaching in the parable of the talents and so on. You can see your role as something you've clawed your way to the top to get, or you can see it as something that God has entrusted you with for a while. And I think that leads to another principle, which is one of faithfulness. The parable of the talents is faithful in little, faithful in much. I had an American colleague whose motto was, love the job you do to get the job you'd love to do. In other words, give every position you're in the best you've got. And God will open up the opportunities for promotions. I dawned on me when I started to reflect and write about these things that the Bible's got no concept whatsoever of career. It has a big concept of calling. And I remember a young guy coming to me and saying, Graham, I'd love to talk to you about your career plans and how you develop through life. And I said, look, really, you're talking to the wrong person. I don't recall ever really having a career plan. I've just really gone through one door as it's opened, and God's opened up other opportunities. And thankfully, I was able to grow with the company and to grow into leadership roles. So I think those things, calling, stewardship, and faithfulness, and underlining all, of course, is humility. Because, when we get to feel that we're indispensable, that we're we're the key person in the whole organisation, it will all collapse without us. I think we're on very dangerous ground.
Yeah. Look, Graham, that's a wonderful note to finish on, that encouragement, and obviously as a testament in your life as well to the faith and the trust in God to be able to walk, and he will open the doors. And no doubt with that comes that sense of peace that you described right back at the beginning. That was a real significant change in you when you first came to faith. So, Graham, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us now, and also in your book.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Well, look, our next episode will land in your podcast feeds in a fortnight, where we're going to consider Christians working in the arts. What value can Christians being in that space? And why is it so important for them to be there? I'm going to be joined by both a visual artist and also a person with wide experience in the world of professional music and literature. But until next time, I'm Andrew Laird, and you've been listening to the Life at Work Conference podcast.
The Life at Work Conference podcast is produced by City Bible Forum. To find out more and register for the conference, go to citybibleforum.org/lifeatworkconference. Enjoyed this podcast? Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing and leaving a rating so others can find us too. Join us next time on the Life at Work Conference podcast with Andrew Laird.